Next, we will have an update from Jazz Pharmaceuticals presented by Karthik Rajasekaran.
Hi, good afternoon. So let's see this. Okay, let's see that. Okay. My name is Karthik Rajasekaran. I'm the Associate Medical Director at Jazz Pharma. 2 years ago, if I were standing here, I would have said I'm from Greenwich Biosciences, and some of you know that Greenwich is now Jazz. And for those that do not know it, you now know it. So the purpose of why Jazz and Greenwich, what we've been doing, has been the same. We want to make sure that we are able to transform the lives of people with difficult unmet needs. We want to make a difference in the life of patients and their families. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is to just share a little bit about what we have done, how we have partnered with the Dravet Syndrome Foundation in particular, but in general with patient advocacy groups to identify questions that needs to be tackled, which are not usually possible in straightforward clinical trials, but maybe sometimes requires that caregiver's insight and input into designing studies that can address questions that most bother you. So I'll just walk through some of that, and I just want to make use of this time to basically say it's critical that we as industry partner with advocacy and also with physicians who are interested in taking care of these patients so that we can increase the awareness around the disease state, but we can also try to make those incremental advancements in filling the gaps in knowledge that exist in these rare conditions. So again, our commitment, whether we were Greenwich or Jazz, has always been this. So we have patients at the center of what we do, and we do that by empowering collaborations and co-production. And again, I'll show you some examples of that. And obviously, we want to make sure that our findings are being externalized via scientific conferences and publications. And most of our research publications are open access, so it makes it easy for people in the patient community, depending upon your level of knowledge in a particular area, to be able to access those articles and educate yourself. And we're also there if you have any questions to answer. Okay, so going back to 2012, there might be people in the audience who may remember. Greenwich reached out to Dravet Syndrome Foundation. There was a lot of use of dispensary or artisanal cannabinoids or cannabidiol back in the times, where people were finding some outcomes that were favorable for the children who had refractory epilepsy in general across many different indications or many different syndromes. The challenge was that those responses were uneven. The question was, is there a pharmaceutical formulation or something that is a standardized formulation where they can test it for their loved ones? And Greenwich at that time was actually developing a pharmaceutical-grade cannabidiol, and there were preclinical studies that have been conducted. And so when this situation occurred, then there were families who had benefited from the use of the pharmaceutical formulation in what was called as the Expanded Access Program or the Compassionate Use Program. The genesis of the Compassionate Use Program started with a patient N of 1, but then it soon spread around. And in the US, we had about 35 different institutions where physicians had access to treat their patients with cannabidiol under an expanded access program. Close to 900 patients participated in that. And those studies then led to the subsequent randomized clinical trials for what we now know as Epidiolex. And Dravet Syndrome Foundation was one of those organizations with whom we greatly partnered in those initial years. Very grateful for that collaboration. But the outcome of that were publications and I would say the first ever studies around a plant-based cannabidiol product. And of course, for the Dravet community, the first drug that was approved for the treatment of seizures associated with Dravet syndrome. So it was a great moment of, it's a testimony really to what partnership between industry and advocacy groups can do. So that's one example. The other example that I can give across Jazz, there are many different departments, and we all collaborate very closely with advocacy organizations because we really want to amplify and elevate your voice and see what we can do to provide greater disease state awareness. Maybe there are some gaps that can be filled by that collaboration. And so what you see in the middle are a couple of snapshots of websites and newsletter that amplify the message that Dravet Syndrome Foundation is trying to do: increase disease state education, increase awareness, show where those opportunities are for families to participate in clinical trials, and we partner with them in those processes. Now, I work in the medical affairs division, and one of the things we can also do is do research studies. So when we did the clinical trials, and as a lot of clinical trials that are done show, it's one easier question to address when you're looking for, is there seizure reduction? That's an easier answer to make because you have seizure diaries that can be followed over time. There are some conventional ways clinical trials have been done, so it's easier there. But when you come to non-seizure outcomes and non-seizure endpoints, because epilepsy seizures are just a symptom, but then you're more than that, how do you track them? The current validated instruments, a lot of times they can't capture it well, they miss it. So the question is, how do we capture what's happening to those beyond seizure symptoms? Are they being impacted by treatment? And how do we get an answer to that? And here we collaborated with physicians who are experts in taking care of patients with Dravet syndrome. As you can see, Ann Berg is there. Scott Perry is there. I don't know if Scott's here in the audience. I can't see him, but I know he's here tomorrow. And so they both came together, and then we had advocacy partners, and I'm sure she's somewhere here. Like, I can't see the face here. But so we did work with folks from the Dravet Syndrome Foundation, Lennox-Gastaut, and Tuberous Sclerosis Foundation to say, okay, what are the instruments that are present where these various milestones can be captured? So we looked at validated instruments, and then we said which questions are applicable to the Dravet community. And so we started developing unique questionnaires that was based on the validated questionnaires from those instruments. And that resulted in what was called as the Become Caregiver Survey. And so it was administered to over 500 caregivers across Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet. About 100 of them were from the Dravet community. And the caregivers basically were asked this question: since the beginning of treatment with the drug, what changes have you seen in your child? Because at the end of the day, the caregiver's perspective matters and their voice matters. And so we asked this question, and we collected the response, and that is what is called as the Become Caregiver Survey. This is a template that a few other places they are employing it now, and I think this is a good way of trying to say, how do we start trying to dig into those places where we don't have standardized instruments, but how do we start getting that data out to see what does it mean for a patient who is on therapy for the epilepsy, and what does it mean for the non-seizure outcomes? Now, one of the things we are really proud of, and again, kudos to the advocacy team and Scott and Ann, is that we also now have what is a plain language summary publication. So what is this plain language summary publication? The plain language summary publication has essentially been generated because it goes directly to the patient community, because sometimes publications have technical jargon, they have article structure, but what we wanted to make is we wanted to make this as accessible as possible, and sometimes I think figures are better than words. And what has been done is that, this is a plain language summary of the same article, but then it's written in a manner where that information is easily accessible. You're able to see via figures, what were the results, why was the study performed, how was the study developed, what were the key outcomes. And so what you would see in this are the non-seizure outcomes and the seizure-related outcomes as reported by caregivers who participated in the survey. So it is open access. There's a link there. If you want to take a picture, feel free to take a picture and go and read it at your own leisure. And of course, let me ask me or anyone from our company, and we're happy to answer questions offline. And so this is again an example of this collaborative approach that we take, because we want to see that we are able to answer questions that are of interest to the caregiver community. Now, I want to just shift a little bit more and share what is going on in general. And, the drug that we have is Epidiolex, which is cannabidiol, and it has been approved for the treatment of seizures associated with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, Dravet syndrome, and TSC in patients 1 and older. So what's going on with Epidiolex? There is a study that is looking at hepatic injury or the potential for hepatic injury. This is a study that is a post-marketing requirement that's ongoing, because when cannabidiol first came into the social landscape, there was a lot that was not known. But since then, we do know that anything that's natural is also a drug that can have an impact on the body. So there can be many effects that we have to be cognizant about. And so this post-marketing study, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, is ongoing. It's been fully recruited, but this is more like looking at long-term treatment with cannabidiol and whether there can be some consequences for liver activity, which thankfully so far have not been major. Now, there is also a pregnancy surveillance program that is ongoing. And this is, again, since 2019, FDA has a draft guidance towards industry that any drug that has been approved has to undergo a specific pregnancy registry. And so Epidiolex is being currently studied on those things. Patients who are participants of this can also be participating in the North American AD pregnancy registry. Then of interest to this group, obviously, we are also doing another study called the PICCOLO study. I'll talk about it. But there are 2 more studies that are listed down there, which I want to touch upon. One is called the EPICOM. And so this is being done in the TS population. But the importance of why I wanted to talk about this study is that these are learnings that we gained from the Become Caregiver survey that we did with the Dravet community earlier in the slide that I showed you. So that study gave us the impetus to ask, could these kind of questions be applied to the TS population? And that's why we are doing a study called EPICOM. In addition to that, of interest to the Dravet community, we are also looking into treatment patterns when patients are being treated for Dravet syndrome seizures. So we are looking at changes with the Adelphi database. We are also looking at what it means to healthcare-related quality of life for the patients and the caregiver for patients who are burdened with Dravet syndrome or Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. So in terms of the liver study, it's to monitor for potential liver injury and liver fibrosis in participants who are treated with cannabidiol oral solution. As I mentioned, we are no longer recruiting for it because recruitment is complete. The study is ongoing and the readout will be in 2028. Pregnancy surveillance program. Again, it's for anybody who becomes pregnant or who is planning to become pregnant and is taking Epidiolex. And this is a study that's active and recruiting. And the estimated study completion is August of 2033. And then I'll touch upon this study a little bit more. So when I mentioned that Epidiolex is approved for treatment of 3 indications, the RCTs, so the randomized clinical trial that led to the approval or the label for these indications were performed in age groups that were 2 and older for Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet. When we did studies with TSC, it was 1 to 65 years. In Dravet, it was 2 years to 18 years. So what the PICCOLO study is trying to do is it's an open label study where we are just looking at safety, pharmacokinetics, and efficacy when treated with cannabidiol in patients for Dravet syndrome, specifically between 1 to 2 years of age, because that's a population that we have not studied fully in the RCTs. So in terms of the study, it's a 4-week screening period. It's very similar to how it was done for the primary RCTs, but then it's a 52-week treatment period, and then there's a 10-day taper after the 52-week treatment period. Every 4 weeks, there will be a safety follow-up or regular follow-up, and then there's expected to be a total of 10 visits to the clinic and 12 phone calls. So the primary outcome is safety and pharmacokinetics, and then the secondary outcomes include a few seizure measures and other global impression of change endpoints. Now the study is recruiting. We are hoping to complete it. It's a small study. We are thinking about 30 patients approximately, expecting the completion to be around January of 2025. The US map shows about 5 sites where, if you're interested in participating, you can consider talking to the investigators there. The website is Jazz Pharmaceuticals Study, and you can find more information there. There is no cost to participate. Like any other clinical trial, you will have the care provided by the doctors and nurses for the study. And then, there might be some reimbursement for time and travel, but that's something you need to discuss with the study team if you're interested in participating. Now, the other part of what we have been doing is, in terms of the use of Epidiolex, we do recognize that it's not always the specialist where the patient lands. A lot of times, the patients might be being taken care of by physicians who are not necessarily up to date or are not routinely using some of these medications that you're hearing today here. And so one of the questions that really comes down to is, how do you optimize the dose? How do you make that patient experience for a drug and give them a fair chance with a drug in order to see if it benefits them? And so one of the things we have also done recently is we have had experts sit together in an advisory board. They came up with some consensus recommendations about how to optimize dosing with Epidiolex, and that study is going to be soon published in an open access journal. And so I think that those in the physician community here might find it useful to probably, share your thoughts about it. It's some of your colleagues who have sat and wrote it, but then again, also share it with your fellows and residents if they may find it useful. So again, our communities, both from Jazz and when we were Greenwich, we continue to work closely with the foundations because, I think our commitment for epilepsy care is steadfast. And we want to continue building upon these successes to drive further innovation in the disease state. So we do appreciate your partnership. And as always, we wish you the very best with this conference. Contact information is here for me, and you will have several of my colleagues here at the meeting. So if you have any questions, feel free to check out this. We are happy to answer, and I'll take any questions that you have. Thank you. I can see you.
Hi, I noticed in the Piccolo study there wasn't anything about exclusions on medications that patients may be on in conjunction with the Epidiolex.
Sure. I think the exclusion for the Piccolo study is if the patient has some other medical condition where that becomes very unstable, and so that would be an exclusion. The other exclusion in the Piccolo study is that if the patient is on any other experimental therapy, so if they are probably going to sign up for Randall's clinical trial, then they probably can't be a part of this, right? And then the third exclusion is if they are taking dispensary cannabidiol.